Hi, good morning, Harley. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening. There is stuff happening in Ukraine that doesn't bode well for the United States or for Europe or Ukraine or Russia or people in general. That's what we're going to be talking about in this video. I am joined by Harley Schlanger, president of the LaRouche organization. Good morning, Harley.
Good morning, Rich. How are you today?
Very, very well. Glad to talk to you. And unfortunately, we've not been joined by our good friend Alex Craner. We do this once a month with him, but not this time. Perhaps next month, hopefully he'll be available. So please subscribe, comment, like, all that business. It's the Saturday, 3rd of January, 10 minutes past 7 in the morning right now. Okay, so let's start with Ukraine. There's been some changes. So on the military field, Russia is slowly making progress. And actually, that rate of progress is accelerating because of the degradation of the Ukrainian armed forces. But there's also big political changes with the appointment of Budanov. Do you want to start with that?
Sure. This is important because you just had on December 29th the drone attack against Putin's residence. And this, of course, is now a subject of debate because the CIA is claiming it didn't happen and that it's a sign of Russian desperation. But the Russians claim they shot down 91 drones that were targeting the area, including Putin's residency. So this is a definite escalation. But at the same time, Zelensky, in fact, this happened while Zelensky and Trump were in a discussion.
Hmm.
And Zelensky has now appointed Budanov, who is the head of the Secret Service and the person responsible for what the Russians call terrorist activities, including the assassination of generals, the bombings, the Committee to Counter Disinformation, which puts out a hit list. He's now been appointed to the head of the office of the presidency, replacing Yermak, who was essentially ran off in disgrace because of the corruption. So now you have the person who has his finger on the Ukrainian terrorist networks and has been one of the most bloodthirsty when it comes to confronting Russia. He's now the head of the office. So there's even as Trump is talking about Ukraine agreeing on a peace agreement, there's an escalation going on. And the escalation includes John Ratcliffe, the head of the CIA, briefing Trump that Putin was making up this story about the drones because of Russia's desperation. And there was an article you may have seen in the Daily Telegraph yesterday saying that Russia is desperate because they now realize that they cannot defeat NATO in a war.
Oh, Harley, the jokes write themselves.
Well, the guy who wrote this story is named Hamish de Breton Gordon, who's a well-known retired colonel from the Chemical Warfare Division of the British military. And he said the Russian military is desperate and the Russian people are now turning on Putin. And the article is headlined something like Putin is headed toward the edge of the cliff. So the desperation from the West continues to drive this language, while Starmer and Macron and Merz are continuing to talk about a €1 trillion buildup of the military, which they don't have the money and they don't have the capability to do the buildup. So this is what's classic example of hybrid warfare. But the problem is Trump has people around him who are itching to continue this war with the idea that this will weaken Russia. And of course, that plays into the British goal of dismantling Russia. So here we are on the verge of into the new year. And instead of looking forward to a year of peace, it looks as though it's going to be more chaotic than previously.
Yep, I think so too. I think so too, because the Europeans are desperate, and maybe we'll get into that in this video. But going back to the strike on Putin's residence, so one, the Russians have subsequently provided proof, radar tracking and whatever intelligence they have to the US, say, look, this really did happen. But before that, why is it an escalation? And what's okay, I'm going to say this. This may sound really bad. What's wrong with one side killing the leader of the other side? Why doesn't Putin just go and bomb Zelensky? I'm sure they know where he is.
Well, they could have done that from the very start. But Putin is playing on a different level. he doesn't want World War III. The people on our side, on the Western side, are willing to risk World War III for their goal. Their intention is to dismantle Russia, to grab the raw materials, to break up the BRICS alliance, the potential for a new financial system. They have much bigger intention that goes back to the historic, the documentation of geopolitics, that you can't allow a unified Eurasia because that will undermine the West. So there's a desperation on the West. What Putin was committed to, he laid out very clearly from 2007 forward: a neutral Ukraine, no Ukraine in NATO, and a denazification. And by denazification, he meant the degree to which the Ukrainian nationalists look at the Russians as what the Germans used to call the Übermensch, the less civilized barbarians who have to be brought to heel. And so this has been the commitment from the beginning. And what Putin has stuck to is the idea of mutual security guarantees. And the West has refused to recognize that Russia has legitimate security concerns about an armed Ukraine. And in that context, you see Zelensky increasingly being put forward as the courageous leader of the Ukrainian people who are being slaughtered because of his policies. And the Europeans are going headfirst into this. Now, we should feel very lucky that Putin has not been provoked into something bigger because, as Scott Ritter said yesterday, that the attack on Putin's residence would be a legitimate cause for a nuclear strike in Russia's strategic doctrine, because it's a threat to Russian national security. So the fact that Putin I'm not sure what he's going to do. They may have a reciprocal response. I don't think he's going to try and kill Zelensky, but there are things they can do. They haven't, for example, hit the Ukrainian government buildings yet. And that's a possibility. So, your question, is it legitimate in war to kill the leader of the other side? Well, why the war in the first place? And the legitimacy of this war has not been yet proven.
Yeah. Well, what you're saying is in stark contradiction to what our great and glorious European leaders are telling us, that Putin's a genocidal maniac, he's going to conquer all of Europe, and therefore we must send our men and maybe our daughters to fight. Well, actually, not we. I suppose the elites are saying you lot.
Yeah.
You lot must send your sons and daughters to protect really our privilege, because Putin is so dangerous. So I don't know, Harley. You're just spouting Russian talking points. So do you want to address that?
That's what Budanov would say. In fact, that's why I'm on the Committee to Combat Disinformation hit list that was put out in 2022 as a Russian mouthpiece, a Russian spokesman. What they actually cited, the statement from me, was when I said that the Ukrainian government is killing its own people by continuing this war. I was speaking on behalf of the people of Ukraine, not Putin. And yet that got me on their list. The point here is that in the whole debate of just war, really, we have to throw that out. There's no just war. And you know that from the work that you're doing on the withholding tax dollars, that there's a higher morality than saying we have a right to kill the enemy. And the problem is, it's definitely the case, if the Russians had wanted to destroy Ukraine and move further west in Europe, they could have done it. They have military supremacy, despite what this knucklehead said in the Daily Telegraph a couple of days ago. The Russian military is far superior, technically and battle ready, than NATO. And in fact, people in the West should be horrified that leaders like Starmer are so willing to send your sons and daughters to die on the killing fields in Ukraine. For what? For the purpose of protecting an Anglo-American strategic empire.
Well, not just that, for the purpose of lining the pockets of the oligarchs that are ruling over us. Don't forget that noble mission that they have, Harley.
Well, that's the goal of the empire, to protect that privilege.
Yes, but I recorded a video with Ian Burlingham, and it's not on up on my channel as we record yet, and we talked about Ukraine and what's happening when empire collapses. what the oligarchs do is they stuff their pockets as quickly as possible with as much as possible before the whole thing comes crashing down. And then I can see that happening with Ukraine. And that what they want more money. The war is hopeless. They're not going to win. The Europeans and the Americans aren't providing the weaponry. They don't have the weaponry that can handle what Russia has. The Europeans don't have the weaponry to provide it. They've wasted it all. But Zelensky wants more money to line his own pockets and to keep paying his supporters before they all abandon him because it ain't worth it.
Well, one of the leading war hawks in the U.S. Senate, Lindsey Graham, said, "This is great. We're getting other people to die fighting against the Russians.
Yeah.
That's what we're paying for." That's what John McCain said when he was still alive and when he was visiting with the Ukrainian leadership. This idea that you get a double bargain. You wreck the enemy and you also get funds flowing into the war machine. But, in terms of the question of pocketing the wealth, the ultimate goal is to sustain the unjust international financial system, which is controlled on behalf of corporate cartels, especially financial institutions, hedge funds, insurance companies. It's not a coincidence that you have the former head of Germany, BlackRock, Merz, as the chancellor. That the one company in Germany that's doing well is Rheinmetall, which is the military producer that produces the Leopard tanks and others. The German economy is being leveled. The auto sector is being dismantled. In France, you have farmer strikes, you have teachers threatening to strike, and the situation with the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. So who benefits from this? The problem is that the people of Europe are complacent. Either they believe the line that they have to be prepared to fight against the Russians, or more likely, they're hoping that it won't come to that. And it's these kinds of delusions that led to the famous book, Sleepwalking into War, about World War I. And that's what's happening right now. And it's extremely dangerous.
And you think we are going to have an escalation with more countries being involved in Ukraine-Russia war?
Well, you read about the Scandinavian countries talking about sending their air fleets to have a no-fly zone. Macron keeps talking about sending in forces. I don't think the European leaders are that stupid. But the problem is, if you keep talking about it, you create a momentum, and at a certain point, you can't stop it. And the Russians know very well what's going on in these Western capitals. They know the economic desperation. Because as you said, it's not just to steal money, it's to prevent the collapse of the whole system. And that's what we're starting to see in the last week. The cryptocurrency markets, for example, collapse. The AI bubble is about to collapse. The Federal Reserve just injected a record amount of liquidity to try to keep things going a little bit longer. And they think as long as they can keep the war going, they can grab some of the resources for war spending. It's a delusion. It's suicidal. But how is it going to stop? And some people in Russia are saying the only way to stop it is to take out either some location in the United Kingdom or Germany to show that the Russians are serious about not tolerating this any longer.
Yeah, which I suppose the risk with that is it would invoke Article 5 of NATO, and then we'd have
all-out war. Yeah.
Yeah, all-out war. Okay. And then Russia keeps pointing to London, and I'm just wondering about the connection between London and Budanov. I'm sure there must be.
Well, remember, the former chief of staff of the military became the ambassador to London.
That's Zaluzhny, right?
Zaluzhny, yeah. And the Ukrainian hybrid warfare division, that is the censorship, the targeting of opposition, was trained in London. And the people who run it, what was called Stop Fake originally, the original fact-checking division, came out of MI6 and the CIA. So there's a direct connection there, and it's been there from the beginning. And then you look at the role the British played in this, the Boris Johnson stopping the treaty that was there, the unwillingness of the British to demand that the Minsk Accord be followed through, the line that Russia was unprovoked. It's in your press every single day. And it's not surprising that people in the United Kingdom might be confused by what's going on and might actually believe the stories. There's a man named Keir Giles, who is at Chatham House, who wrote a book called Russia's War on Everybody, in which he said that you can't trust anything the Russians say because they're genetically committed to lying. And this is what goes through the Royal United Services Institute, Chatham House, MI6. They believe it. Or if they don't believe it, at least they're willing to risk people's lives to defend that line.
And then what ends up happening is ordinary people believe that, because I hear that stuff, and from friends and people I follow who aren't necessarily politically involved or whatever, but they'll make this comment about how Russia's against us. And the way I kind of look at it, Harley, is so many years ago there was the World Cup cricket, which was shared between Pakistan and India, many years ago.
Yeah.
And what I noticed was how in Pakistan, where I was at the time, there was this fervid nationalistic animosity towards India. And in Pakistani discourse, it's kind of natural. Don't like Hindus, don't like Indians. And I imagine that there's an element of that in India with regards to Pakistan because of the way the British played them off. And then people within that milieu don't necessarily see it because it's just the water that they swim in. But for me, coming from the UK and being brought up in an area where there was a very large Indian community, so I had loads and loads of Indian friends, coming from the UK as an outsider and then seeing that in Pakistan, it's like, whoa, this discourse in the background. So then what we have in the UK over perhaps hundreds of years is this background animosity and rivalry and distrust and detestation of the Russians.
Yeah.
And the Russian civilization, because the British Empire hasn't managed yet to plunder Russia and its $75 trillion worth of resources.
Well, that's the big target. And there are constant seminars in the United States. The Heritage Foundation and others have had seminars to discuss how Russia could be carved up. And this actually was started at the fall of the Soviet Union in 1990-91 with shock therapy. And our friend Alex wrote an excellent book called The Grand Deception about one of the case studies of Bill Browder, a speculator from the United States who was stealing from Russia. And when Putin came in and tried to stop it, Browder wrote a book and built up this whole story of Magnitsky, the great lawyer who was fighting against Russian corruption. And they got the EU to pass a sanction bill against Russia based on this false story, which Alex completely debunks. If people want to get a sense of what was going on in the 90s when Russia had a drop in life expectancy of males by about 7 years and went into a demographic crisis because of the looting. This was a deliberate plan that came from Harvard and from the city of London to break up the Russian nationalized industries, not to allow for Western competition, but Western takeover. And had Putin not stepped in, Russia would have already been broken apart. There were civil wars, there was Chechnya, Georgia. The regime change operation was in full force when Putin came in 1999. And so we already have, the Russians had a taste of that. It was a bitter 10 years, supposedly to break up the Soviet system and establish free market capitalism. But it really was to make Russia a subservient colony to Western interests. And the Russian people are aware of that, and that's why they support what Putin's doing. We in the West think, well, Putin stopped free enterprise.
Which is not the case at all. Absolutely not the case. He's rescued Russia. Okay, now you said that there are these seminars still going on in the US about breaking up Russia, which points to something you addressed at the beginning about the war within the administration. So you have Trump and Zelensky talking peace at the same time in these peace negotiations. You have an assault on one of Putin's residences, official residences, by Ukraine. So is it that Trump is doing this, attacking Putin, or the CIA is doing this, or some other body?
Well, this is where you get to the question of the so-called deep state. Who actually, whose interests are served by a war? And it's clear that the Lockheed, Martin Marietta, Boeing, the military industrial complex of the old military industrial complex wants us to continue. But there's a new game in town, which is the artificial intelligence Silicon Valley crowd, Palantir, for example, that are selling surveillance systems, targeting systems that are very much moving into the center. And that their argument is, well, we don't have to risk men and women on the battlefield. We can do it with machines. And this is very attractive to politicians who don't want to be blamed when bodies come home wrapped in their coffins, wrapped in American flags. But it's still war. And there are people throughout the Defense Department, the security and defense intelligence agencies, the diplomatic corps. But then you also have people in the intelligence and diplomatic corps who are dead set against it, who have been silenced. Take the case of Jacques Beau, the very prominent Swiss intelligence official, who's been sanctioned. He's left in a man without a country in Brussels. They silence people, they shadow ban, they shut down social media if they can. You know very well the UK is at the forefront of this kind of warfare against the freedom of speech. So why do they do this? Because they have to keep a pretense that they're doing something for the people as they're looting them. What happens when your tax dollars no longer go to the National Health Service and to infrastructure, but they go to defense companies that build inferior products that are going to get people killed?
Yeah,
That's what we face.
Or go towards building this digital prison that they do in the UK and in the European Union, digital IDs, CBDCs, biometric wallets, so we can eat nothing but crickets, and that will make us much, much happier than we are currently. And I just want to mention notaxforwar.com if you're in the UK, that it's a criminal offence. Consider this, it's a criminal offence to pay any local or central government tax, fine, fee or levy directly or indirectly, because doing so violates the International Criminal Court Act and the Terrorism Act. And people can find out how they can legally, lawfully, peacefully withhold their taxes by going to notaxforwar.com. And thank you, Harley, for mentioning it earlier. And it's we got to do what we can. We have to do what we can to resist the rollout of, well, this war against us, this war against humanity, this war against people. We don't want war. Certainly the German youth, because you're in Germany, who've got these letters, these 18-year-olds who've got these letters saying, well, are you fit to fight the Russians? Are you ready? How much notice do you need before we send you to be slaughtered by the Russian army? How has that been received?
Well, I have 3 young children, and previously they thought I was a little bit out there with my political activity. And yet recently one of my children was involved in the protests against the universal conscription. This is a huge fight inside the Bundestag, where the governing parties, the Social Democrats, who are about to disappear, they're sort of in a situation like the Tories. The pro-war parties are pushing not just to have mandatory conscription, but to have them prepare to fight in Ukraine. And the young people, so it was a shock to them, because previously they were marching in the streets against the Alternative for Deutschland party, which was the anti-war party, but was being called the pro-Nazi party. And now they're marching in the streets against the government. And this kind of turnaround can happen quickly. And you see it in the popularity polls in the United Kingdom, where Starmer is slightly more popular than yellow fever. Macron is less popular than malaria. But the people don't know what to do. And the no tax for war is certainly a commendable effort. But if you go out and march on these things, you could end up sanctioned, have your bank accounts closed, going to jail for who knows how long. That's why this is a hybrid warfare, which includes every aspect from kinetic, actually shooting, to silencing opposition and changing the way people think through coercion. So it's an extremely dangerous moment. And it's time that people who are aware of these things be heard. and there are demonstrations, there are all kinds of activity, but somehow it doesn't seem to get through to the parliament or to the Congress or to the Bundestag. And the American people have shown that they do not want these wars. That's why they elected Trump twice. And yet Trump's party is calling for war against Venezuela, war against the Palestinians, war against Russia, war against China. Taiwan is heating up again. And it's not because the Chinese are threatening the West or the Russians are threatening the West. It's the collapse of this imperial system. And you're right there at the heart of it. People who say that the British no longer are part of an empire don't understand how the City of London is integrated into every aspect of international finance and commerce.
Yep. That's a very, very good point, Harley. And we're going to finish up in a few moments because thanks to you and others of your ilk and the ideas of LaRouche, and that I've begun to see the role that the City of London had played for hundreds of years, and is now playing in the background, pulling strings, running the whole show, out to empower itself and enrich itself at the expense of humanity. That I'm now of the opinion that there is no geopolitical analysis that can be in any way complete unless it includes the part being played by the City of London. So this guy, who wrote this article in the Daily Telegraph, well, he's a retired colonel, you said, or he's a colonel from the British Armed Forces.
Yeah.
Therefore, he'll be connected indirectly, at least, to the City of London and its game, which is to plunder the resources of Russia in order to enrich itself, as it has done since the Bank of England was incorporated in 1694. Okay, Harley.
It's a long history.
Sorry?
It's a long history.
It's a long history, and they're very, very good at it. Very many, many years of practice. Harley, anything you want to say before we finish up?
Just that a lot of this is covered every day in my daily updates. I do a daily video update available at the LaRoucheOrganization.com, and I try to keep it to about 10 to 12 minutes, looking at the leading developments of the day from the standpoint of this continuous arc of history, of a fight between the American system of the American Revolution, which is now spreading worldwide as an anti-colonial movement, against the desperate efforts to sustain control over an imperial looting operation.
Yes, very good. And I'll have the links in the description below for the LaRouche organization. And just for people to know, if you want to have a contemporary understanding of the American system of political economy, look at what Traoré is doing in Burkina Faso. And I've got a video coming out about that pretty soon. All right, this is Rich and Harley signing out. Please comment, share, like, all that business. And between now and when I see you next, stand for peace. And if you're in the UK, notaxforwar.com. Thank you.